You're listening to the Fooled by the Root podcast.
Hello, this is your host, Heidi Marble. I'm glad you're here to listen to this episode with David Brown. He is a domestically adopted person who has been faced with the challenges of reunion late in life. He decided not to seek until he was in his 60s. We discuss the importance of safe connection, community, and finding the proper support. He continually pours out encouraging and validating content through his social media, My Refocused Life. Dave and I also discuss boundaries and how he protects himself from negativity. Enjoy this episode. Dave, I'm so very happy that you're here. And then we get this time together. I would like to read your bio before we drop into your story.
Thank you.
So Dave is a social media blogger, adoptee living in San Jose, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley. His story is a mixture of luck and tragedy. After retiring from a long career at the University of California, he left for New York City to write about his larger-than-life experience. He became temporarily disabled after falling on ice shortly after arriving, and spent the next year navigating the city and becoming a professional line sitter. Upon his return to California, he began work on a novel about survival. In 2019, he decided to take a DNA test after reading Dani Shapiro's Inheritance, a story about how a random decision to take a DNA test upended her life. Not thinking about the consequences, the results opened the door to a radical shift in consciousness. He writes about the complex emotions of discovering the identity of his birth parents and genetic relatives. To know one's origins and family history was a huge gift. At last, I'm like a real person. Wow, Dave. So much goodness in all of that. I think the thing that really strikes me hard, and I want to hear more about your origin story, but we really need to talk about the consequences of reunion. But before we do that,
yes,
can you tell us, for people that aren't familiar with your story, can you give us whatever version you would like to?
Sure. So when I say that my life was full of tragedy and luck and serendipity, I mean, it's so interesting how a fall on ice led me to be here today talking to you. And it actually led me to my partner. I never intended to take a DNA test. I had thought about it for years, and I thought, well, I'm 65. What is it that I really think I want to know? I was probably more interested in finding pictures of people that I was related to, as opposed to, forming relationships with people. And I think, well, I actually did. I waited this late in life to increase the likelihood that I would not have to meet my parents. That being 65, that they would probably be older in their 80s and 90s. And unfortunately, I was too late. My biological father died in 2006, and my mother died in 2012. So I was a little late. However, in another stroke of serendipity or luck, my mother gave me my adoption papers when I was 50. And on the adoption papers was my adoption decree. And on the decree, due to a clerical error, they had not stricken my birth name from the record. So here I am, I'm 50. I find out who I am. The only clues I had to my identity, one, that my mother was a registered nurse and that I was Irish. And so both of those were pivotal clues in finding the identity of my mother. DNA testing is crazy. It is so in Ancestry, they use the autosomal DNA testing method, meaning like everything is just dumped into a big pile. And then you kind of have to sort through it to figure out, I was matched with first, second, third cousins and fifth cousins. But because I knew my birth name, I had a slew of of, cousins with my last name, my birth name. And something I never thought about was oftentimes in the 19th century, men got married. Well, actually, in the 21st century, my maternal grandmother had been married twice, and she had 10 kids. And my great grandfather had 14 kids. So my grandfather was the oldest of all these siblings. And so the descendants of my great uncles had no idea who my grandfather was or how we could be related. I had a search angel named Janine Mallory, and she was able to, let me tell you something else. When you are presented with all this information, even though I knew rationally that a first cousin meant that I shared a grandparent, and a first cousin also meant that that person had an aunt or uncle was a parent of mine. But that's really, when you get that information, you're not thinking right. You're just, your whole head is a jumble. And then the other component is I'm adopted. So, there was a good possibility that I had no idea, how I came to be, because my mother, I later found out, had gone to Norfolk, Virginia from Roanoke, Virginia to have me. And so the whole thing was a secret. Now, I don't know for sure if my father knew that she was pregnant. I don't know. I don't think so, but I'm not absolutely certain. So I have these first cousins, and then I find that my first cousin, my paternal first cousin, says, "Hey, I don't." So I have an uncle John and an uncle Jimmy, and Uncle John couldn't have kids, but Uncle Jimmy did, and he's the lone. So there were three brothers. So it ruled out her family, and then I found, and so John and his wife had fertility issues, and they adopted. So which left, the third brother, and I found out I had three half sisters. Well, it's a shock. I mean, it's a shock to everyone. I mean, I was fortunate. Well, I feel very fortunate in the fact that I was older than the three sisters. So, I wasn't the result of an affair or some sort of, strange, weird situation. So, but it was still a shock for these girls. And, I didn't really think about when somebody sort of like arrives on the scene, a stranger, what does he want?
Right.
What do you want from us? And honestly, I really didn't want anything. I seriously just wanted to know a biography of my parents. I wanted to see pictures, and then I was interested in genealogy, on both sides. So the search angel was able to put together maternal and paternal family trees going back 8 generations.
What? That's amazing, Dave.
So I went from having no living relatives to having 100 plus people that suddenly, were a part of my new reality. And it was overwhelming. So I first found my father. So we started with that. And then everyone, like the search angel and my half sisters and cousins, they all wanted to know who my birth mother was. And I wasn't ready to find out. I mean, I was already dealing with the shock of finding my biological father and having 3 half sisters, and then their dynamic and opening up my life to people that I didn't know. And it was a lot. And I had no therapist. I was kind of winging it. And
Yeah, been there, done that, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, I was just sort of winging it, and I hadn't belonged to any Facebook groups, no social connection, because I just felt like, well, it's gonna be very cut and dry. I'm gonna get in, I'm gonna do, like an exploratory surgery, see what's up, and then step back. And I had really hoped that I could just sort of observe from a distance, trying to play catch up of 60 years of like, who are you? And so eventually, like a couple of months into this, I said, well, okay, I'll explore my mother's side. And then we found a first cousin, and because we shared the same grandmother, there were pictures on Ancestry of my grandmother and then my mother. And then it turns out this woman, Georgia, was a registered nurse and Irish and had red hair, and she looked exactly like I thought she was going to look. I mean, it was shocking.
There's just, I don't think there's any way to prepare for reunion, Dave, but I think you made a few really powerful points. You were just winging it. And I know for me doing that, it was such a lonely and frightening process not to have the proper support. So this might be a good time to interject to those who are seeking. What would you say to them from your lived experience, just as they walk into this unknown space?
Yeah, honestly, I did look at some people's experiences through DNA detectives because they were very helpful and supportive. But I really felt like, oh, well, that's really nice for those people, but I'm fine. And let me tell you, when you think you're going to be fine, it's okay not to be fine. I would say this: take your time. You do not have to, rush into this thing like I did and sort of absorb this whole completely alien. It's your story. So it's you do things on your own time, and get a therapist. I did not have a trauma-informed therapist or an adoption therapist, but I did after probably 3 months into this, I did get a therapist, and, I just talked to her about stuff, and it was awesome. And she didn't try and, well, it was all for the best, because I got that a lot. People said, why did you open up that can of worms? Why did you, quite frankly, it was none of their business.
Yeah. And I think I was reading something, I don't know who posted it, just things you shouldn't say to an adopted person. And that's definitely one of them. And there's a reason, because it's asking us to back up again. When I hear something like that, I feel you don't deserve to know your truth. But I don't think that really answers the question of who am I? And like you said, Dave, to be your age in life, have a very well-established life, and to go in and have this huge emotional explosion, and then you have to kind of rewrite your life. I don't know if you had that experience, but I went back in time and I was like, oh, that's why I did A, that's why I did B, right. That's why I don't trust. There's a sorting that starts to happen in your mind.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. So my whole life, there were certain things that I did, reckless things that I did, and I had some mental health issues, like a lot of depression. And I grew up in a, fairly stable house. I mean, there was no reason, nobody in the family, my adoptive family, had depression. And, I found out that ran in the family. And I guess I just hadn't thought about a lot of these things. I just felt like I was defective, and that's just the way it was. And there was a chemical imbalance, but I never ever thought like, oh, well, there's a genetic component to this, or there's intergenerational trauma. I will say this: be prepared for anything. And when I say anything, I mean anything. I never, I just didn't consider the consequence, the ramifications, the mental health ramifications about how much turbulence I was going to face. And, our loved ones, they can only provide so much support because they don't know. And they just figure like, well, that's that, just, move on. And then there was, like I said, there was some family dynamics going on before I arrived and a lot of rivalry. So when I arrived on the scene, I became the new toy. Like I would have one person call me, one sister call me on the phone and tell me what the other sister did, and that sister would call me, and then the third sister would call me, and then it was like seriously, I was supposed to have a reunion in the fall of that year, and I canceled it because I was like, no way am I going to go 3,000 miles and do that. But the bright side of all this was I have a 94-year-old aunt, and she is my father's sole surviving relative. So I call her every week. She became like a second mother to me. And she's very ill. But anyway, I decided, this was 2 years ago. She was having a birthday, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to see her. I was not really interested in anyone else. I was only interested in meeting this woman. And meeting her was wonderful, but I got there and there were some substance abuse issues, and it was I was rattled. It was a lot of dysfunction. So the reunion didn't last. I mean, I have 2 or 3 cousins that I'd speak to, but I don't know if it's even realistic long term. Like the connection was severed, 65 years ago, and I'm not a part of any family. My adoptive family, they're deceased now, and so it's very strange, being orphaned twice. Both sets of my parents are gone. And I don't think about it most days, but some days I just think, like, did that really happen? Like,
yeah.
Or what just happened?
Well, it's the stuff that movies are made of. Honestly, there's so many complications inside all of it, Dave. And I wonder, even in this place of having lost everybody and reunion wasn't successful, I don't know if glad is the right word, but are you glad that no matter the outcome that you took the step to know more about your life and your circumstances?
I'll tell you probably the thing that kind of threw me was I was able to see this. I was able to send away and get my adoption file. In the adoption file, it really it described my mother at length. Like what she liked to do, what her aptitudes were, what kind of personality she had. And so that was priceless, because, and then talking to my first cousin on her side, she grew up, within close proximity of my mother, remembers my mother. And so I'm glad that I've been in contact with these people because they have personalized or made humanize these people that were ghosts. So I've kind of had to look at it from that angle, as opposed to, like, interpersonal dynamics, which it happens in every family. But just the contact with these people, and even my sisters who talked about my father, I felt like, oh, okay, so I really do feel like I'm a real person now. I mean, I feel solid.
Oh, I love that. That's
just felt like
amazing.
I was like the half invisible man. Like we don't, who are you?
Right.
Who am I?
Yeah. That is the question. It's so interesting because last night we had guests over, and my son plays classical piano, and I rarely get to hear him play. And when he was playing, I was thinking of you, and I was thinking of the post that you were talking about the piano.
Oh,
And I
right.
think about your strength and your vulnerability. And I think it's such a great example, Dave, especially for the men out there who are hurting, to say, listen, our voices matter, our pain matters. We can lean on each other. And the reason I brought up the piano is because I think adopted people often have these crazy talents in a good way that they do because they can speak through that words that nobody will ever listen to, but you can speak it through an instrument or through your art or through your writing. And what can you say about that as you become this person who feels real? You know, what elements, because we can go off the deep end and do a lot of negative stuff to ourselves that is not
For
helpful.
years, I'm doing an Instagram live on Wednesday, and I'm going to talk about connectiveness and how the lack of connectiveness really puts you at risk for suicidal behavior and at-risk behavior. I mean, when I was a teen, you know, I would, you know, steal my dad's booze. I mean, not bottles, but I would take sips because I found that it anesthetized me. You know, it put me buffer. It was a buffer for me,
Right.
and I allowed me to kind of like live undisturbed. And then it progressed. You know, when I left home. And the more I got into that, the less connected I became to people. And well, this was before the internet, but yeah, I mean, I mean, I wouldn't say that my whole life was, you know, a wreck, but, and I kept it together. You can keep, you know, here's the thing, you can keep it together on the surface and hide it. And it's miserable because you're just like chipping away every day at your soul. And and then I just stopped thinking about anything. It's anything to not be here, not to be connected.
Wow, dude. Yeah, I understand that. One of the notes I took is, so Anne Heffron had said, you know, an anxious mass, like writing from your core, the parts that we act, we hide parts of ourselves. We're looking for approval. All of these things just are so, there's so many layers inside of this. And it's like we're trying to find our way out of it in any way that we can. And what are some of the ways that you were able to or are able to cope on a daily basis now? Because clearly you've removed the alcohol, and so what does all that look like?
Well, I've built some pretty solid relationships with people online, but even better, I started an Adoptees Connect group here in San Jose, and so for the past 3 months, I've been meeting with people, you know, outdoors. Nothing beats like a face-to-face like encounter with somebody. I mean, this is great, but it would be completely different if I was in your house or you know, we hung out all the time. I mean, it would be a whole different vibe, and that's what we're doing with this group. It's a pretty consistent group of 5 or 6 people, and we get together once a month and, you know, really talk about in-depth things, not surface. There's nothing surfacey about this. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but sometimes you just have to go on a deeper level. And I think that has helped me really connect. You know, I was nervous as heck starting this thing. I had no idea what it was going to be like. I had no idea if anyone would show up. And I just sort of put myself out there. And I guess I sort of feel like, you know, I don't have a lot of downtime. I mean, at 65, it's funny, like I sit here and I think, well, how many actually really quality years left do I have? And how many years have I just sort of frittered away and a lot. And now it's kind of like, oh shoot, because it does creep up on you before you realize it. It's like, oh my God. I mean, my first partner just turned 81, and I thought, oh my,
Oh,
yeah, no, that's great, but then I think like, shoot, I've really come to the conclusion where I cannot get involved in drama. I mean, well, I mean, you can't totally eliminate drama from your life, but I have to be really careful about the energy I expend, because I feel like it just steals away from your presence and being here. Like, you're not here, you're just somewhere else. So, and I've
yeah.
done far too much of that. So, you know, and if they don't have like a group in your hometown, post a notice. Like, I went through Meetup to find people, other adoptees. And I put an ad
That's
on
actually a great
Craigslist.
idea.
Yeah, no, Meetup is great.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful. You're right. We can't replace that connection with each other. And I do feel it's so important to have that. And I'm sure you can relate to this, Dave. Whenever adopted people hear the word connection, like we start going, just because it's
yeah,
so
totally
hard to connect to anything. But it's like the thing that almost killed us is also the thing that will make us stronger. And it's really hard to grapple with, oh gosh, if I connect to you and I love you and I let you in and you leave. So I appreciate that you're speaking about this.
Yeah, that's why I'm doing a Instagram live. I came across a paper by the CDC where they're really putting an emphasis on connectedness to the social fabric, to people in your community, and how that has become an effective method of preventing suicide. So, and that's so important with adoptees, but like you said, it's like connection. Woo.
I really like that you said that, because you're a living, breathing example of how connection can help us heal and manage and cope with the challenges that we're facing, with all of the complications that come with being an adopted person.
Well, in this
and
moment.
being able to relate to others where you don't have to define it. It just already exists. Yeah. And Dave, I look forward every day to your posts. They're so inspirational, just depositing something positive. And I so appreciate what you're doing for our community, your activism. And I also love that you're exempling what boundaries look like, because I think a lot of us have difficulties with boundaries too. Just go ahead and run right over me, and I'll go ahead and run right over you. And you being able to say, kind of taking power back, right? Some power back, because we lack that.
I know what I wanted to mention. So I didn't set boundaries when I first got into this, because I was so afraid that I'd be abandoned, like that they would.
Right.
And so I would advise anyone just sort of getting into this is really sit down and say what you're willing to negotiate, because I didn't. And I didn't say what I really felt, and I didn't set boundaries, and I just sort of let people, wash over me. And like I said, because I was so afraid that they were going to reject me. And that's why I didn't look for my parents to begin with, because I just felt like they're going to just say, no, we don't want to have anything to do with you. So, yeah, it was weird, because when I first met these people, they were like, hey, do you have a Facebook account? Can we be Facebook friends? And I'm like, gosh, I need to tell you about my life. And I didn't even know if I wanted to do that. I mean, it felt awkward.
It is, because you're setting yourself up, you're being vulnerable and setting yourself up for more rejection. Dave, is there anything else that you want to say? Anything that's really important to you to communicate to? We have such an amazing audience of people from all over the world that are listening in.
I don't know if there are adoptive parents watching this, or hopeful adoptive parents watching this, but here's the thing. as much as you want to love your child, as much as you think, nurturing is it, like, your child will become you. And I have to tell you that nature and genetics and intergenerational trauma and all that stuff really influences how your kid is going to turn out, and just have to be patient and do the research, even with the best of intentions. Just love your child.
That's so beautifully said, Dave. And what about the adopted people that might be taking that sip of alcohol and turning on the TV and anesthetizing? What would you say to them?
That's a tough
I know.
one.
I know.
It really is a tough one. I almost feel like people do it when they're ready to do it, when they've had enough. And
yeah.
There are a lot of resources out there. There's Adoptees in Recovery. Facebook is really full of really amazing resources. And I would just have to say, to the person who's suffering, is that you're not alone. We see you, you matter, and that there is help out there. So don't give up.
I think there are a lot of people that needed to hear that. Before we press record, Dave, you were talking to me about your live and some of the things that you were going to talk about. You belong here.
At my lowest, I felt like, it did not matter whether I was here. And it does matter. And so I wanted to, sometimes I feel like, gosh, I hope this doesn't come off as too kumbaya. But, connectiveness is something that we don't talk about, especially with guys, men, that whole connectiveness. It exists, but people don't talk about it. So trauma is important to discuss, and CPTSD is important to talk about, but it's also important to talk about preventative measures and what you can do to take care of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Well, this has been an incredible time with you. I'm just so excited to know you, Dave, and to see your progress and your progress in healing. You are dynamic and full of light and love. And I know a lot of people will be helped by this conversation and by the work you're putting out in the world. And just please come back anytime, and hopefully we can be in person. That would be fantastic.
That'd be awesome.
Thank you so much, Dave.
All right, Heidi. Thank you very much.